Texas baseball is 5 months away from its much anticipated return, and there are many new developments with the team, one of which is Texas's new conference, the SEC, and the elevated level of competition being brought before the Longhorns. I'm Henry Hipschman alongside Gabriel Silva, here to bring you another episode of Behind the Dish, the podcast about everything and all things Longhorn baseball, brought to you by Burnt Orange Sports Network. How you doing, Gabriel?
I'm doing pretty good, Henry. We're a little bit closer to the start of the season, and I can't wait.
We are getting closer to the start of the season, and like we said, a lot of new developments, a new head coach, a new conference, a new recruiting class. But what we want to focus on today especially is that new conference, the SEC, the highest level of competition in collegiate baseball. What are your thoughts on it?
Of course, the SEC is obviously the best baseball conference. Just last year, um, this, the conference had multiple schools win over 40 games on the season. Multiple schools win, 20 plus games in conference play. So it's really, really challenging. There's going to be no divisions, I believe. If it's not happening for football, I don't think it's going to happen for baseball. I'm not completely sure on that. But the SEC East, SEC West are it's taken away now. But last year you saw the SEC West had Arkansas, Texas A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, Bama, Ole Miss, Auburn. That's all in one conference, so it's gonna be challenging. And then of course on the other side you had national champion Tennessee. Kentucky had a good run last year. Georgia did really well with their top prospect. I can't remember his name, but they did really well with him. And then of course Vanderbilt, always good year in and year out. And then South Carolina, Florida had a bit of a down year, but they were still competing in the World Series and Missouri. So top to bottom, that whole conference has teams that are really ready to compete, week in, week in and week out.
And yeah, and I do believe they are getting rid of the divisions for next year. They think they're doing that for every conference now. The Big Ten no longer has divisions, at least for football. We're pretty sure that will stay true for baseball as well. But the SEC, like we've been talking about, before the show and talking about most of this week going up into this episode, how crazy it is, the difference it is between the SEC and other conferences. I mean, when you look at the top 10 recruiting classes in the country, 8 of them are SEC teams. LSU is topping it. Texas is number 2. Texas has 19 commits right now, 8 of them in the top 100. LSU has 13 in the top 100. And they're followed by Arkansas, Tennessee, who's just coming off the national championship. You have Texas A&M, who has 4 in the top 100. Vanderbilt, a historically great school of baseball. Mississippi State and Alabama. And it's kind of just this crazy thing that we are seeing, and it's the dominance they have had really has been almost like ridiculous as well. Because like you said, Tennessee, but the runner-up was Texas A&M. Those are 2 SEC teams. The College World Series is dominated by SEC teams, and now Texas has to deal with all this new competition.
Yeah, that's right, Henry. So you said it before, Tennessee won last year. A&M was the runner up. There was almost half the field was SEC baseball teams for the World Series, and a lot of them were nationally ranked seeds. Also, who had to host the regionals and the super regionals. So they're competitive. So let's see if we can go and take a look at this upcoming schedule for Texas.
I mean, also, by the way, since 2017, only one victor of the College World Series hasn't been an SEC team. That was Oregon State in 2018. The rest were Florida, Vandy, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, LSU, and Tennessee. So it's just, it is that dominance that we've been seeing in these last couple of years.
Yeah, I believe that even that Oregon State team had to beat an SEC team in Arkansas to win that national title. They dropped the foul ball there and down the line. So let's see if we can go take a look at the preliminary schedule that Texas has put out for the season. Looks like they have a weekend in Arlington, Texas, where they're going to take on Louisville, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma State. Those are all some quality baseball teams, you would say, right, Henry? Like Louisville, they've competed before in the ACC. The ACC, I would also say, is probably the second best baseball conference in the country behind the SEC, because the ACC had the other half of the teams that were inside of the College World Series. The Big Ten doesn't compete in baseball. The Pac-12 is non-existent anymore. So you're kind of looking at the SEC, ACC invitational for Omaha now. So they got to take on Louisville. They got Ole Miss. Ole Miss kind of struggled last year. They had a 27-29 record, 11-19 in the conference, but their SEC, I mean, they had Arkansas, A&M, Mississippi State, LSU, Bama, all in the same division. So I don't think many teams would succeed with a schedule like that. And then, of course, Oklahoma State, Texas played them last year, and I believe they won the series. And it's an old Big 12 foe with a lot of you know hate that's probably going to be stemming from that game. What do you think about that? Kind of. I don't think it's the opening weekend, but what do you think about that round robin type of deal uh, up in Arlington, Henry?
Well, that's going to be the kind of game that will really define this team early on. No, I don't think they really have any easy wins on the schedule. They have teams they definitely should beat, but it's games like that early on that kind of establish not the culture, but kind of the trajectory of where the season's going to go. I'm not saying teams can't turn things around. They can, obviously. We see it every year with different teams and different conferences. But you really want to kind of get things going quick or get things going well kind of right away with a new coach like Schlossnagel, because that way you get your players to feel this feel this idea that having this new coach is propelling us forward, is making us better as a whole, and giving us this opportunity to really take over this new conference, or at least be a competitor in it. Because I don't think Texas is going to take over the SEC right away.
Mm-mm.
I don't think that's really a possible task, even with the new coaching staff they've had, even with the new recruiting class they're bringing in. I don't think you can do that right away. Obviously, with the history that these other teams have established. Maybe if it was 20 years ago, possibly with the way Texas was playing. But now I just don't think you can do that. But you can start off strong. You can come out of this season winning most of your games, going to the regional, coming out of the regional, going to the College World Series, trying to make it to the Final Four if possible, maybe making it to the final round if your team can really find that chemistry and that magic that Texas expects Schlossnagel to bring to the Longhorns. But but a game like that, like you were saying early on in Arlington, is just a good way to kind of establish culture, establish precedent, and it's a game you should win and want to win.
Yeah, so the whole schedule hasn't been released yet, but we do know like some of the early season like showcases with a lot of these college teams where there's 8 teams and you play 3 of them each, and then of course we know the SEC schedule. So a little bit after that opening series weekends like slate up in Arlington, we got another slate in Vegas. We got them taking on Washington. I remember last year Washington came into Austin, and I'm not sure if they took 1 or 2 games from the Horns in like a midweek series or a weekend series on a cold, like rainy kind of April weekend. It was one of the cooler weekends of the year. But Washington came in here and kind of tried to take care of business. Texas Tech. I mean, obviously that one's going to be a big one for the Red Raiders. They're going to be looking to try and beat a Texas team that went off to the SEC and kind of left them behind. And I think Texas Tech's probably going to be a good challenge. I remember last year as well. It was Texas taking that weekend series 2-1 with a lot of high scoring games in that matchup, which highlighted Texas's pitching problem, where they just gave up runs and runs and runs, but the offense had to like uh, rebound. And I remember one of those games they scored like 20 runs just to like stay afloat, and even then you still didn't know if the game was fully over or not.
I mean, Texas Tech, I mean, it is a new year, obviously, but they finished 10th in the Big 12 last year, and that's a game you want to win. Oklahoma State finished second, so that's understandable if that's more of a competition. That's a game not you can lose, but the expectation is different. With Texas Tech, that should be a game they kind of should cruise through a little bit and, kind of and make a stamp for themselves.
Yeah, going back to Washington. Washington came in here and won 9-3, 5-3, and then lost. Texas beat them 4-3, but they had to play 8 innings because of the weather delays. I believe it was a weather delay, and it kind of cut that game short. And then you got Illinois. The Big Ten, not that big of a not a competitive conference. So I mean, these are games where you're playing D1 competition. It's a lot different than playing small schools from like California, small schools from Florida, small schools all around the country coming into Austin. So Texas can run the home game numbers up and try to perform in front of the fans. But that's another good weekend, and then uh, just soon after that, you got opening SEC play, Mississippi State. I mean, Mississippi State was the third best team in the SEC West, and uh, probably middle of the pack, I would say, of the whole SEC in general, because uh, they had division standings. Uh, Mississippi State had a record of 17-13 in conference, 39-23. That's not shabby at all. Like last year, Texas finished 36-24. A 600 winning percentage. That's
Mississippi State was one of the 7 SEC schools that were finished the season ranked at 22. So that's not a game you can breeze by, and it's not a game they should expect to breeze by. None of the games in the SEC should be expected to be like that.
Yeah, like we said, like we keep saying, both episodes, and every single weekend is going to be a dogfight, week in, week out. You can't, let your guard down. I mean, that Mississippi State series, they have to go to Starkville, Mississippi, and that's one of the rowdier places to play at in the SEC. Texas is lucky that the following week they don't have to go to LSU and play the Tigers in their home field. That's a rowdy environment for any team to go into there in LSU. And speaking of LSU, LSU is their next opponent. They were one of the better teams. I mean, they won the national championship 2 years ago, but of course they lost their best players like Dylan Cruz and Paul Skeens. So
But the recruiting class they're bringing in is top in the nation. Like we were talking about earlier, 13 prospects in the top 100, 18 commits in total. They were awarded by the college recruiting rankings on the Perfect Game website 208 points in total, which trumps any team by about 20. So that's a game. They're going to have players that are going to be young and fresh, and these athletic guys who maybe won't be super well adjusted yet at that point, but could possibly just have these breakout games and have these great development games. And that's like Texas is going to want to look out for.
yeah, if any of these freshmen are going to be playing as soon as they step on the field, because I mean LSU has, they have the NIL, they have the coaching staff, they have the atmosphere to be a competitive SEC team year in and year out. So if any of them freshmen are in the starting lineup, it's going to be hard for a team like Texas to adjust, because that's only the second SEC weekend of the season for the whole conference, I believe. So that's going to be hard if trying to adjust, trying to attack the right zones, the right spots against this. If there are any young guys on the LSU team, but going back to the recruiting, they had, like you said, the number one recruiting class. I mean, that doesn't just happen out of nowhere. Henry, the coaching staff, they know what to do. They have the pedigree. I mean, uh, they just had 2 top 5 picks 2 years ago, and they keep sending them out more and more and more often. I mean, when you're a young high school kid and you see LSU interested in you, and they say, "Yeah, I mean, look at our past. We just sent a lot of top draft picks. We just won a national title. Our other sports are really good." I mean, it's kind of hard not to say no to a team like LSU when they're interested in you. You know what I mean, Henry?
And LSU is definitely going to be that kind of first really big hump that Texas has to face. They were 6th in the SEC in batting average last season with 284. And if pitching struggles continue, like you were talking about from last year, I don't know if they're going to be able to kind of deal with that in a way that will come out with them winning an entire series. It starts with the pitching, like you said. So it's that high-powered offense. They like the only teams they're behind are Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, A&M, Vanderbilt, all other ranked SEC teams, and they're barely behind Vanderbilt because Vanderbilt was batting 286. But it's just a team that can become hot and was hot and is very consistent at the plate and will be consistent year in and year out.
Yeah, that's right, Henry. So moving on to the next opponent that Texas would have, it looks like they're scheduled against Missouri. I mean, maybe that's the one team that you're like, okay, we can kind of relax on, but you can never relax in this conference. They finished 9-21 in conference play last year. Missouri did, and they finished 23-32, so not the best record. I mean, it's a competitive conference. It's hard to compete in a conference like this when everybody else is beating up on each other, and you're just probably one of the punching bags. So
But that should be a series that Texas pulls out pretty quick. Or not
yeah,
quickly, but pretty well.
but
Pretty well.
the only thing is that it would be on the road, but I'm not familiar with Missouri baseball's atmosphere, so it's not LSU, it's not Mississippi State, so it'll be a lot easier for the Horns. And then they have Georgia coming in to Austin first weekend of April. They lost their top draft pick, Charlie Condon, I believe, and I mean he balled out last year, but Georgia's losing a lot of guys. I think they just came up just short in the Super Regional, and they didn't make it to the World Series, but they did have a great run. I mean, they were top three in the SEC East, right behind Tennessee and Kentucky, two other powerhouses in the conference. I mean, 43-17. No team lucks their way into 43-17 a year ago. You know what I mean, Henry? So Georgia, it's going to be competitive. It's going to be a good series. It's going to be in Austin, and I'm excited to see how the Horns do. And then right after that, they have Kentucky. I mean, we were talking about Kentucky just a little while ago on how good they were.
And that's gonna be because it's an away game. That's gonna be especially difficult. As good as a team as it is, Kentucky is not a friendly environment. I think a lot of people think of them, think about like football right now with how that's going for the team. I mean, they're not doing bad in football, really, but the environments they have with their other sports, with basketball, with baseball, the sports they especially excel at. It's a very hostile environment. It's a very ecstatic fan base that really cares about these teams that can succeed. So that's going to be especially difficult. Something to have to deal with is the crowd for Texas.
Yeah, and then right after that, they're gonna have lowly Auburn. Last year, Auburn finished 8-22 in conference, 27-26, so a little bit better than Missouri. But I mean, with the expectations that this team's gonna have, you should expect that they should take 2 out of 3 against this Auburn team, or maybe even sweep them.
I mean, there's projections right now that of for the top 10 teams in baseball that Texas will sit at number 9 with this new coaching staff. So that is the games you want to win. That is the games you expect to pull out.
Yeah, and then after that, so they get a little bit easy with Auburn and Missouri, kind of like a month apart. But then this end of season stretch is going to be something interesting. Um, they had national runner up Texas A&M at the end of April, and then right after that they have to go to Arkansas and have to play the Razorbacks in Fayetteville. I mean, that's a tough stretch right there. And then after that, of course, they have Florida, and Florida's not too shabby either. I mean, uh, they've been national title contenders for the past couple years as well. I mean, they just barely missed going to the national championship last year with Jack Caglione.
They finished at number 8 last year in the top 25 for those listening who may not know. And then as we're going on, like Florida going to be another difficult one. This last stretch really looking like a gauntlet for the team. And with baseball, with how long these games are, with a 3-game series after 3-game series after 3-game series, and then playing all these really good opponents, it can take a toll on a team, both mentally and physically. And that's something that the Longhorns are going to really have to learn how to deal with. Not having these easy opponents kind of every other series, every 2 series, like they may have had with the Big 12.
Yeah, and like that A&M series is going to be 3 straight games of sellout crowds more than likely. I mean, A&M fans are going to try and come in here and take over Disch Falk Field, and I mean, I saw it last year in a midweek matchup. A&M came in here, the fans took over. They were blowing their bubbles all over the field, and they just ran circles around this team um, early in the year. It was not a good sight. I mean, they lost 9-2 against A&M last year. I mean, of course, we know A&M ended up being the national runner-up. So, looking back, it's not that bad of a loss, but in the moment, it really felt like it was. And now,
But doesn't it feel like a little bit that we kind of have an advantage a bit over that team with Schlossnagle at the helm? he knows a lot of these players, at least the ones that didn't leave after he left. He kind of knows how they think, how they work, what their weaknesses may be, how they can exploit it, what for the batters, kind of where they need to direct their hits. For the ones who are capable of that, for the pitchers, where these guys are weak in their batting, where to target them, where not to target them. So it doesn't feel like a little bit that we kind of have that leg up on us or leg up on them, and a little bit of an advantage in that area.
Yeah, I mean, me personally, I would say that weekend in April is going to be circled on a lot of people's calendars because that's a big series considering the stakes as well. And then of course Arkansas was not terrible either. I mean, they won the SEC West last year. 20-10, 44-16 record. They just barely squeaked out over Texas A&M, who had the better overall record. But I believe they beat them at the end of the year, and they took over that conference lead. So that's a reigning SEC West champion, and we just talked about how stacked the SEC West was, and that's Arkansas, and you have to go over there to their place after just playing, and probably an emotional series against Texas A&M. That's going to be something hard for this team to try and overcome.
Yeah, it's definitely. And Arkansas, one of those teams finishing ranked. It was actually 8 SEC teams if we're including Oklahoma, who's also joining the SEC with us. It's just kind of this pile on of series, and again, being away, that's going to be difficult. And then looking forward towards Florida again, or looking forward towards Florida. I mean, that's going to be a game that you kind of really have to pull your team together if you're Schlossnagle down this stretch, like really keep their mindsets into it. And depending on how they're performing, obviously, if they're performing not the way they want to in their first year in the SEC, if they're kind of getting that SEC wake-up call, he's going to have to really keep them in it and finish out the season strong depending on how things go. It's a little early to speculate on that, of course, but, that is something to keep in mind.
Yeah, once like after that Auburn series, it's going to be a battle each and every single weekend. After Florida, they have Oklahoma. They beat, I believe they beat Oklahoma in 2 out of 3 last year, but they have to go back to Norman again after going this past season. And it's a rivalry series. I mean, tempers flared a little bit last year. There was a lot of close games, and I mean, we'll just have to see where that Texas team ends up once the season ends, and then it's straight into the SEC tournament. It's just something that's kind of like
It's kind of, you know, 2, 3 straight months of a gauntlet a little bit, and then carrying into June if they go that far. That's just they don't really have an easy series after that Auburn matchup. At least they shouldn't if they go as far as they want to go. So that's just going to be it's really a test every year for the SEC because you don't have these easy teams you can beat like you do in football in years prior, like you did with Vanderbilt and you did with Kentucky and you did with those lower end teams. I mean, this year they're performing well in football or better at least, but it's just everything is going to be a hard contest. And for Texas to come out on top, they're really going to have to pull behind this new coaching staff, this new system that they're going to have to develop, this new culture that they're creating, or at least this old culture that they're getting back that they had 20 years ago.
yeah. Then of course an important part to that is who are going to be the guys that are going to step up for this Texas team. Last year, or some notable returners: Jalen Flores, Rylan Galvan, Will Gasparino, Kimball Schuessler. Waiting to see what the pitching staff looks like. But last year we had Ace Whitehead, Max Grubbs, and I mean even Big 12 Player of the Year Max Blue. It's going to be a lot of guys coming in, trying to help this team. They experienced what happened last year. They're going to try and reverse that this upcoming year, and it's going to be interesting to see how this team does with this season coming up. Henry.
Yeah, and you mentioned these big players, Jalen Flores. That's going to be a guy who's so crucial, not just offensively. He was batted 340 last year, finished with an OPS of 1.064, 56 RBIs, 22 extra base hits, 18 home runs. But defensively as well. I mean, I got to see him in the orange and white game a couple weeks ago, and he was not letting a ball by him. He was really looking solid in that shortstop position. And Schlossnagle was discussing really going into this season so far that he's one of those guys that they know they're going to have to depend upon. Him and Ballou, Gasparino as well. He batted 250. or 252. He's a good supporting player. 47 RBIs though, 14 extra base hits, and then Max Blue, just a powerhouse hitter. Also in the orange and white game, first at bat sends the ball over the fence for a home run. So these are the guys that they're going to have to rely on, and that Schlossnagle is going to have to rely on, even though they're not guys that he brought in and that he developed.
Yeah, I mean, going back to Jalen Flores, I mean, he hit 340 a season ago. 2 years ago, his first season on the 40, he hit 175. That's a huge improvement. He played 45 games, but he only started 29. So it's a small sample size, 103 at bats compared to 241. But that's a big improvement. 175 to 340. Nobody just lucks into, such a big increase like that. And he was one of the clutch guys for the Texas offense last year. Every single time it felt like this team was down, it felt like this team was, about to lose a game, into the box stepped Flores, and it seemed like he came up with the timely hit, the timely walk off, the timely home run. I mean, opening night of the season last year, Jalen Flores hits a game tying home run to give him the lead, and they ended up winning the game. And he showed it from day one that he was going to be there. He was ready for the moment, and he was ready to perform if necessary. And uh, he's going to be one of the best guys on the team this upcoming year. I'm excited to see how, this is going to be his third year on campus, and I'm excited to see how much he's improved from 1 week to another, or from 1 year to another.
And I think something we have to look at too, as well, is not whether these big guys are going to step up that we know are going to step up, that we know are capable of this good performance. It's the guys who maybe didn't play so well last year, fighting for a spot right now. A guy like Jaden Duplantier, who batted 111 last year, but looked good in the orange and white game. He looked fast across when he was running the bases. He had a couple of good hits, and he looked good at second base. So it's kind of those guys who are going to fill in those gaps, who are going to fill in those holes and step up and become role players, so that we can have a back half of the order that can support the front half if the front half is struggling, or if that top of the order is struggling, and they can pull out big wins and big games. You know.
Yeah, and Duplantier last year was stuck behind D Kennedy. D Kennedy now transferred out to Kansas State, so that opens up a roster spot. Second base is open. Duplantier plays second base. He's a junior now, so it's going to be interesting to see if he ends up, actually taking up that spot that was kind of taken up by D Kennedy, and it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, we have there was a lot of guys who left last year. Jared Thomas, who got drafted by the Rockies. LeBarian Johnson Jr., the big Friday night starter who would, set the tone for the weekend. And then, of course, Tanner Witt, who started off on campus extremely well, and then he had his Tommy John a couple years back, and then the last 2 years he was just fighting to get back in, and he just never could find it again. But he was a fireball pitcher, and it's going to be interesting to see who ends up being these guys who are going to pitch on the weekend. I mean, last year we had Ace Whitehead, Max Grubbs, I believe Cody Howard did as well. But I mean, it's going to be interesting to see who ends up being the guys who takes the balls on the week, who Coach Loss is going to trust to put the ball in their gloves on the weekend. I mean, because last year we lost like Charlie Hurley, and it's going to be interesting, like who's going to be the guys to round up that pitching staff, because right now it looks like there isn't much. I mean, I don't see many standout names in the roster right now, but I'm sure some of these transfers, some of these returning guys are going to have to step up and be the guys for the weekend series, and especially with this SEC gauntlet that we're going to have.
The uncertainty is high, and so is the competition. One thing we are certain of is that it will be interesting to see how this team can adapt, how this team can really change for this new conference under this new head coach. That is going to wrap things up for our second episode of Behind the Dish, a presentation of the Burnt Orange Sports Network. Thank you so much to you folks at home who joined us. Again, I am Henry Hipschman, along with Gabriel Silva, and we hope you join us next Monday for another episode of Behind the Dish.